Hey, Matt Wheeler, it's my pleasure to work with you today.
Hey, I'm excited to be here.
So he's already shown his socks. So this is now on the recording, but apparently it's a thing that Matt has cool socks every time he's here. So they're
Yeah,
watermelon.
yeah, we got watermelons today. But no, I'll have clients who literally will show up in my office and go, "Your socks are boring today." And I'm like, "Yeah, sometimes they are."
It's really a thing. If wow, okay.
Well, I don't wear shoes. So
Oh,
I take my shoes off. I actually learned like in a psychodrama training or in various psychodrama trainings that I've done, like one of the things that you do is you remove your shoes as a way of grounding. It helps you to feel the floor and be just very connected to your environment. And then in some cultures, removing your shoes is a sign of like respect, and I'm present and I'm here. And so when I found out I had a really legitimate reason not to wear shoes, I was like, I'm never wearing shoes again. When I'm sitting in my office. And so now, yeah, my clients they just know I'm in a pair of socks and it works.
well, and that's interesting about that because I've heard of other therapy things where it's grounding, but grounding to the earth. Like you have to have your feet on not concrete. I mean, it has to be on the earth. And they were talking about how important that is. So that's interesting that, comes back again.
Oh, totally.
So we have a question. How has cyber sex, such as chat room affairs sex, affected long-term relationships after discovery?
It's a good question. Part of me, so as I read it, how has cyber sex, such as chat room affairs, affected long-term relationships? Like, I don't know off the top of my head if cyber sex, such as chat room affairs, um, I think maybe as I'm just kind of processing this, the difficulty that we run into, like I'll give you an example. I remember when I first started studying sexual addiction, the original research, uh, I believe it was 80% of all sex addicts had been sexually abused, right? Like it was an astronomically high number, especially because 1 in 5 boys between the ages of 1 and 18 and 1 in 5 girls between the ages of 1 and 4 girls between the ages of 1 and 18 have ever been sexually abused or sexually assaulted. And so with numbers like 25% of the population and then or 20% of the population, depending on the gender, when you have sexual abuse occurring, but then you have a population of sexual addicts, which I believe at the time was 6 to 9% of the population or something around that, and 80% of them had sexual abuse as their history. Um, it was just an astronomically high number. I hope this isn't too confusing, but I'm going to try and tie it all back together. So ultimately, when you what has changed is that isn't as much of a marker anymore. In fact, lots of times trauma such as sexual abuse was such an indicator of sexual addiction. And what's happened is with the accessibility of cyber sex being so accessible, chat rooms, pornography, I mean, it is just so incredibly easy. It's not a matter of if a child or an adult for that matter is going to be exposed to pornography or cyber sex. It's a matter of when. um, that what's happened is, obviously I think those numbers are coming down as far as people who are sex addicts being sexually abused. So how's it going to affect relationships, long-term relationships? How it's going to affect it is that the accessibility to access cyber sex is so much more available that the ability to relapse is just going to be easier, right? And what I try and encourage in recovery, and this is, I mean, this doesn't just include uh, sexual addiction. I mean, this can be alcoholism or whatever else. And this is a reasonably controversial statement. I mean, I remember somebody a couple of webinars ago maybe wasn't even very happy about how I said this, but ultimately we have to look and go, recovery can't be about perfect sobriety. Recovery needs to be about when I do slip up, regardless of what it is. If I slip up, am I going to come to my partner and disclose? Am I going to be honest? Because honesty is more important than poor behavior. So when we look at it and go, cyber sex and having the accessibility, it's going to affect a person's sobriety, but really what's going to affect the long-term relationship is the honesty. And so coming back to, yes, it's so much more prevalent. Cyber sex makes it so much easier to slip up, but really honesty is the key for us to have a secure, connected attachment. So I know it's scary, right? It's scary for all of us that cyber sex is so easy to get to. I mean, the prevalence of, I mean, massage parlors or anything else that's out there, strip clubs or whatever, all of those things make it very painful. But as far as long-term recovery, we're really going for honesty as our key factor. So hopefully that makes sense, Tammy. And
It does. It makes sense. And Dr. Roberts talked about, slips versus relapse as well. And, what I heard you say, is a slip. And he had a partner that was very upset, and misunderstood that he was saying everybody's going to relapse. It's inevitable. And he's like, no, but, it's, the severity of it, and not minimizing, but the severity of it, but also the coming forward and saying, here's what happened. That's completely different than going, oh, well, I did that, so now I'm just going to go down, the train track and, and do everything and lie and about the behavior, ongoing. That's a relapse, and that's very different. So, but the other thing I was thinking about with this is, I've had partners who are, and I don't want to say just, but where their addict has just used, porn or cyber sex. There has not been physical contact, and they've struggled a bit with feeling like they're not as betrayed as someone who has, had massage parlors and, hookups and prostitutes and all of those type of things. And, I don't know that you can go, this level of betrayal is not as bad as, it's like, it's a betrayal of what was agreed to. Can you speak a little bit to that?
yeah, so it's really, I think it comes down to the betrayal tends to be like what level of trust or what level of, for lack of a better way of saying this, like expectation did I come into this relationship with, right? I've seen people who maybe they've gone through a lot of trauma in their own life and they're actually a pretty healthy person. And if they find out that their spouse has traumatized or has done large levels of betrayal, they actually can be like, well, unfortunately, this happens. It's super painful and obviously very distressed, but they've already kind of come into the relationship with this idea that problems are going to happen. We're going to figure out how to work through them. And so I've seen very like high levels of betrayal. Again, I don't know how to say that to not minimize, but and they are able to kind of work through it a lot easier than somebody else who came through and said, you know what, I'm going to marry somebody, and when I get married, things aren't going to be maybe as difficult, or we won't have problems with sexual issues. And so catching their partner using pornography can be absolutely devastating because they had maybe a core belief that said, man, if I'm in love with somebody, or if I live in a healthy way, then the universe will provide me a spouse who treats me equitably. And whatever core beliefs that we've built up tends to determine, in a sense, our level of betrayal. Um, and I don't know that that's the easiest thing to explain, but it it kind of depends on that belief system that we carry in. And I don't know that I could ever say to somebody, I could ever say to somebody, your spouse only looked at pornography and lied to you about it. That's not as bad as somebody else who had an affair, because it really depends on, it can be worse for the person whose spouse looked at pornography than the person whose spouse had an affair, just based on each other's trauma histories and everything else.
Well, and
So
even your core values. I mean, if you know you come from a foundation of, you know, like pornography is against your beliefs or whatever, like that's, you know, that can really just completely knock you off your socks. You know, regardless of the, you know, no touch, but it doesn't matter. I mean, it ultimately is, if the betrayal is painful for you, the betrayal is painful for you, and you deserve support around that, not minimizing or, you know, poo-pooing, oh, yours isn't as bad as that person's. You know,
right.
it doesn't matter. So
And with, like, for instance, with teenagers that I'm working with, or with you know, young 20s, that sort of thing, there's a generation and a culture of people who have been raised in the internet, I mean, full internet coverage, right? And they actually say, no, I mean, I don't want my spouse to ever look at pornography, but like if it happens, like I understand, and it's not healthy, and we're going to talk about it. But like that generation, it's going to be less painful just because of its prevalence, for instance. And I can't generalize, right? It all depends on, like you said, culture, religious beliefs, everything else.
but I
But
think you just said it too. It's like they're going to talk about it, and because they've been raised and it's so prevalent that
right.
you can have the conversation. It isn't, you know, it isn't the shameful thing. It isn't, you know, hidden away. You know, they can go, you know, you're doing this and I don't really like it. Let's talk about it. You know, what's driving you to do that, or how can, you know, I think they can negotiate the differences a lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, next question. Hey guys, I feel a little sad. I'm going through a devalue phase from um, I assume narcissistic person spouse. I thought he was interested in recovery. At least he let me believe this. I feel this is unfair to me and giving me hope, but his heart became softer. No, but his heart became softer. I saw a huge difference in his behavior, but his dominant personality takes over when I talk about life feelings, my experience, thoughts, etc. Then I cause, um, I'm having trouble. And then I cause a narcissist injury, and he bails on me every time. He leaves me then. It shows he only tells me what he wants me to hear, and not his, in his narcissism, he is the perfect partner. He is wounding me over and over. He is self-destructive and takes me down with him. I feel such a fool.
Yeah. Wow. Um, so the difficulty is, I mean, if you're truly dealing with somebody who has a narcissistic personality disorder, right? Like lots of times we'll see people who have narcissistic tendencies. A lot of times, um, I'll give you an example. Like if somebody is struggling with an addiction, there's so much shame there that there are times where you will see them avoid pain and avoid shame, and they really do look narcissistic. But as they get more and more healing, a lot of those narcissistic tendencies tend to diminish. Um, and but if you have somebody who truly has a narcissistic personality disorder, if they're not getting treatment for it, then as a partner, you have to figure out, like, what can I manage? What can I deal with? Like, can I hang in this relationship knowing that this is what's happening? And I've seen, like, you guys have heard me talk about on here before. If you understand what's happening and you aren't internalizing it, which it would be hard for me not to internalize that. That's very painful if I'm reaching to my partner and I'm getting shut down or only getting vulnerability on their terms. Yes, we can stay in that type of relationship if we basically accept that this is the nature of the relationship. If we can't, then our hope gets built up and we see this sign of connection, and we actually get vulnerable to make the connection. And if it triggers their shame, they're gone, or they're shutting us down. And then all of our pain comes up, especially if we can't hold that space and go, it's not about me, this is their shame. That is very difficult for any of us to do. It's tough for any of us to hold a shame shield all the time. And so, I can hear your pain and why you would feel like a fool. And it's sad, because I think probably some self-compassion to realize, are you a fool because you fell in love with somebody and hoped for the best? Of course not. Are you a fool for trying to love somebody and help them to heal and find recovery? Of course you're not. But and again, are you a fool for reaching and being vulnerable and letting yourself get hurt again? I don't believe you are. You're just somebody who loves and wants to have a closer relationship. Now, what you choose to do, if you can continue to move in the relationship, certainly continue that way. If you can't, then you've got to figure out how to move beyond that relationship. But I hear your pain, and relationships are so hard to navigate, especially when you're dealing with addiction or personality disorders. So I hope that you find the answers you're looking for on where to go, because that's tough.
Yeah, she added, he is not an addict. Dr. Rob has only worked with a handful of people out of the thousands that he has that are true narcissistic personality disorders. But he said, if you're up against that, they don't care. They will not care. Oh, I'm so sorry. If he's not an addict, I don't hear that you're doing any professional counseling to help navigate. I share this all the time with people who email or call. They're looking for a couples therapist. Well, when there's active addiction, it's not so helpful. When the couple's moving forward. Yes, if there's active addiction, holding the space for the relationship is but you can't fix a marriage if one person is out of control with their addiction. Well, it'd be tough. Maybe somebody can. I don't know. It's not my experience.
There's some foundational work that can be done, but ultimately there's a lot of individual work that typically needs to be done before we can get real deep in the relationship. Because the addiction, it's what we refer to as, it fractures the attachment, right? So instead of reaching to my partner on a regular basis, I might reach to my partner, but then I'm consistently reaching to another attachment, which is my addiction, which isn't obviously a healthy attachment. So yes, there's some work that couples work can be helpful with in initial addiction recovery work. But we have to just be careful how deep we go initially if the people haven't done the work around it. So,
but if the person isn't an addict and so then to me this is like couples work.
Yeah. So the toughest part, so personality disorders. Personality disorders can be tough, right? There's sometimes that we look at them and go, this is really an attachment issue. This is an attachment disorder. Sometimes it's trauma and shame, right? So, but when it comes down to it, personality disorders are workable if the person who has it is working. It can be really, really tough to be in a relationship with somebody who has a personality disorder who's not actively working on it. And it's really tough because they're not going to make the progress. They don't see themselves as the problem typically. So, yeah.
And at the end of the day, kind of like what you said, if this person is not willing to do anything, and you keep getting hurt at some point, I was talking to somebody the other day, and I said, okay, if this person stays not doing anything to progress, it's a year from now, what do you visualize?
Yeah.
And 2 years from now. Now, if you make a shift, I mean, we always hope that the person gets help. So, if the person got help, what would it look like? But, if you made a shift and went, okay, I'm beating myself up, trying against a brick wall, this isn't working. If you visualize moving away from the relationship, what do you visualize for 2 years from now, whatever? I mean, I think it's just good to look, because I think we get so caught up in the moment and just trying to deal with the chaos that's going on, to give yourself an opportunity, and if you pick option one and go like, I'm all in all the time, rock on. But I think just having the opportunity to be intentional about it can be helpful.
Yeah, I think sometimes we're way too quick, maybe as a culture, to say, well, I would leave my spouse if this ever happened, or, as a culture, we're just very quick to say, if my spouse can't change, I'm not staying with them. And I think that as anybody who's been through it, it's wow, it's really not that easy. It's not nearly as black and white as we'd like to believe. And so I push all the time. There is no shame in staying in a relationship. What I encourage people to do is just be in the relationship with your eyes open, right? Like if you're in the relationship and you're married to somebody with a narcissistic personality disorder, or you believe that they have a narcissistic personality disorder, read every book you can on it. Start learning as many tools as you can. Learn, how survivors or family members cope and do well in that type of a relationship. Learn how to take care of yourself in that type of a relationship. But there's no shame if you stay. I've heard it say that, or heard it said that when we get married, sometimes people think, oh, I'm at the end of my problems, and it's like, we don't realize we're at the end, which is not, it's the beginning, if that makes sense, of our problem. We're picking up a stick. There's two ends, and so it doesn't matter who we're in a relationship with. We're going to be dealing with some type of issue. And some people, I think, feel shame around staying in a relationship and choosing the problems they currently have. So you're going to spin the dice, or roll the dice, whatever metaphor I'm trying to use here. You're going to roll the dice, and stay in the one that okay. So just have your eyes open, learn and grow and heal as much as you can, and stay in the relationship if that's what works for you.
Absolutely. I just think being intentional about it is helpful. One of my friends, not too long ago, we were talking about relationships, and she said the best advice she got on relationships before she got married was, a friend of hers said, you can't be everything to another person, and they can't be everything to you. And you need to figure out what you need and make sure you're getting it, and I think that's true. That's why we have all of the support options on sex and relationship healing, because, betrayed partners, getting help and support from other betrayed partners really makes a difference. Addicts who are struggling or on the recovery journey, getting support and encouragement from other addicts, great. The two of them looking for each other to, like it can be bumping up against each other's wounds, especially early on. So getting that support, really helps. So
I think I think betrayal in a relationship oftentimes is much worse when that person, is, well, the more that person is our sole support. And oftentimes in the healing work, I'm teaching people that you don't want your spouse to be your only support. Now, I think I've said it on here before. It's important that our spouse is a foundational piece of that overall foundation, but that it is unhealthy to expect that our spouse is going to meet all of our needs or even the majority of our needs. I remember being really disappointed at one point when my wife told me that she doesn't like mountain biking as much as I do. And she says, "Go, have fun, take a trip with your buddies and go mountain biking." It was kind of like, oh, but I wanted that to be something we do together. And as I gained in wisdom and age, it's really actually great for me to go and have that time. And so I teach something what I call the list of 18, where you have 18 people in your life, 9 of them, so half of them know your whole story. There's no secrets. And the other half, they might know some of your story, but they're just fun to be around. And so you're constantly reaching out. So I find for me, I reach out about an hour a day, and I get phone calls or I'm sending video messages back and forth to friends and buddies, and I'm getting connection and support about an hour a day, not including what I get with my wife. And I feel like that for me is foundational. That's how I stay healthy. Now, somebody else may need a lot less time than me. Somebody might need more time than me. So I don't have obviously a specific number on anybody's need except mine, but that's what I found. We have to learn to grow our support system. And I think when our spouse has a problem, or if our spouse has a slip, for instance, the more grounded we are with a good support system, the less painful that will be because we feel secure. Now, it's painful. We're not going to get away from that pain when betrayal happens. But I think that's a really good thing in helping us minimize or lessen the pain of betrayal.
My husband is great, but he has very few words to use during a day. And so, like, I need my girlfriends because we can, talk. He will never be that person. He's great. He's my sounding board, but like I need more chatter time than he does. So,
It's so funny. I remember learning, I don't remember if I learned it in grad school or before then, but something like women typically say something like 15,000 words a day and men say like 8,000. I mean, it was some phenomenally different thing. And the funny thing is I actually learned for sure in one of the trainings I had that women, I think 75% of the time, are the pursuers in a relationship, are the ones seeking the partner, saying, "Hey, I want to talk, I want to be close." And so I'm with you where I'm like, "Hey, I want to talk." Bah, 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 bah. I've got all these words and all these things, and my wife's like, "Oh, okay." Right. And so I'm so with you. Give me a group of guys and women who I can just be all chatty with, because I love it.
well, and I think that's how we find, it's like that works for us. If we were both, 20,000 words, it'd just be chaos all the time. So I think I was thinking, I think my husband maybe maxes out at 5,000 a day, but I make up for it. It's all good. So.
That's awesome.
Okay, next question. What if your addiction is love and consistently reaching out to the other person on a compulsive basis? How does that affect normal attachment with another person, or if that person is also an addict with something else like alcohol?
Okay. I mean, so I guess I'm trying to understand, are we actually talking about like a love and relationship addict?
Well, I kind of wonder about that because of the compulsive reaching out and things, it feels like the pursuer. So,
Right. Well, so I guess that obviously you'd want to, well, how about this? There is what we refer to, so you've got the 4 quadrants of attachment styles, if you will. Um, you have uh, a secure attachment, a secure attached person, or you have an anxious attachment, you have a
avoidant,
and then you have dismissive, right? A fearful, avoidant, and then dismissive. So you've got that. And sometimes you find when they have a lot of those traits of a love or relationship addict, just because they've got this insecure attachment and they're reaching out compulsively just to try and calm their anxiety. And so one of the things that, I mean, I think I've recommended this recently, and there's a book called Attached, The Adult Science of Attachment by Amir Levine, if I remember right. Talks a lot about this on an adult perspective. And so learning to work on our individual shame and our individual insecurities, and learning to become more secure in our attachment, so that we bring down that need to say, I need you in order to feel secure, right? It's learning just to work on those compulsivities. Now, if you're really talking about a love addict and a relationship addict, obviously they're going to need a lot more recovery, a therapist that they're working with to really dig in and understand what's happening there. But I'm trying to figure out the next question on this question. How does that affect normal attachment with another person, or if that other person is also an addict? So if you have somebody who's like an anxious attachment, and then you have somebody who is an alcoholic, right? Then typically you're dealing with two people who don't have a secure attachment. And what may be happening is you've got somebody with an insecure attachment reaching to somebody else with an insecure attachment, who then is now reaching to alcohol to try and soothe. And so you have potentially very destructive and unhealthy relationship, where both people are needing to get within themselves and figure out how to start healing those pieces. But I guess I'm not quite sure how to answer the question more than that.
Well, it makes sense. And I put the link for the Experience in Close Relationships questionnaire, and it's a self-assessment, but you can kind of figure out what your attachment is. But I was thinking about the alcohol addiction too. And I had said something to Dr. Rob one time, because we talk about intimacy disorders, and it isn't just sex addicts that struggle with that. Because I said, I think every addict, whatever form it takes, has an intimacy disorder. And he agreed with me. We're unable to handle our emotions. We're unable to be vulnerable, in an intimate, not just sexual, in an intimate way. And so, alcohol, cannabis, whatever form we're using, keeps us distant. So if you are a person who needs that attachment, it makes sense that as this person is withdrawing, you're going, hey,
Yeah.
So it makes
Your anxious attachment is going to increase so much more, and you're going to desperately try to pull that other person towards you, which is going to freak them out even more, right? And so you get this cycle of one person pursuing and the other person withdrawing even more. And it's just terribly sad, because both people aren't getting their needs met. But no way in there is there blame. The anxious attached person isn't causing the alcoholism. And so, but yeah, you end up in this cycle of two people desperately trying to get comfort and connection, and it's not working for either one.
But professional help with both could be very helpful. So, hi.
Oh, yeah.
My partner and I are two recovering addicts. Yay. 2 years clean, both. Yay. We've been together for 2 years. We don't live together. During the pandemic, he dumped me. Oh, and we've had no contact for 2 months. Then we got back together. Okay. And it's been a month and a half of things looking brighter. We have been going into couples, sex, and relationship healing webinars. Fantastic. This week, though, he went into his man cave without specifying how long he would be in there, which I respected until the third day was my fear of abandonment got triggered, and I broke up with him, justifying it with, before I'm abandoned, I better abandon first.
Yeah.
Gosh, that is so, I totally get it. 24 hours later, we spoke again, and we continued arguing until he reassured me he loved me and he wants to be with me. during the conversation, he said that the reason he shuts down is because he feels he can't talk to me, because whenever he tries, I ask him if he has called his sponsor, gone to meetings, which he hasn't as of late. And that to him sounds like I don't want to listen. How do I deal with this? And she goes on, I'm not a sponsor. He's not my sponsee, but whenever he stops doing his recovery homeworks, I become the first enemy in the line, feeling like he blames me and wants to make me responsible for his feeling, and then shuts down because I don't listen. I'm active in my recovery with my sponsor and meetings, and all I really know that helps me sort of sort myself out is recovery homework. When I have a problem, first thing I do is call up my sponsor or go to a meeting. So when I ask him if he's done that, because that's what I do, that's when there's trouble. I feel like when he wants to share with me and he hasn't been doing his recovery homework, somehow I feel overwhelmed and pressured to fill the sponsor or psychologist group partner role. What advice would you give us in regards to this issue? We are both here. Glad you're both here.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I love that you're both in recovery. Thoughts, Matt?
Yeah. So what I hear happening there is, one, it sounds to me like he is having something going on, and he's disconnecting maybe as a safety mechanism. Maybe he's afraid of rejection or afraid of attachment. Sometimes we get really scared. I don't want to attach because then that gives me more vulnerability to being hurt. Sounds like in this case, as far as when you're talking about now that you've gotten back together, after so long of him being gone, you're scared of then being rejected. Now, one of the things that I would encourage in that moment, I think it's important for him to start opening up and teaching you about what's going on in those moments where he's disconnecting. So I think that's really important. Now, he may not know, and that may be something he needs to start exploring. Why is it that I want to disconnect? And why am I disconnecting for so long? And how does my disconnection affect the people around me that I love and care about? Now, your abandonment comes up, and I totally get the I'm going to abandon him before he abandons me, especially if you're coming off of already breaking up after being together for 2 years. So that's really scary. And what I push people to do is, in those moments, how are you reaching to him to say, hey, I'm really scared and I'm afraid of being abandoned. And I don't know where you are. Can we talk about what's going on for you? Can we talk about what's going on for me? And I always encourage people, try to get into the emotions, try to get into my fear, my loneliness, get into what I'm feeling rather than telling the other person, here's what you're doing, and this is why you're messing us up. Because I was going to jump into the next part of your answer. And I think I wanted to do this. What happens when we get afraid is we typically tell the other person, here's what you need to do. So if you go to 12-step more often, or if you tell me if you've talked to your sponsor, we are reaching to them trying to say, tell me what you're doing so that I can feel reassured, so that I can calm my fear and anxiety. And I can feel safe that you're going to stay with me, because if you get back into your addiction, I'm scared that I'm going to lose you again. And so what I encourage a partner to do is to even acknowledge, say, hey, I really want to ask you how your recovery is going because I'm feeling scared and I want reassurance that things are going good so that I don't lose you. But I know that if I start asking you about your recovery, you're going to feel like I'm a parent and you're a child, or you're going to feel like I'm telling you what to do, whatever that dynamic looks like. And then you're going to get mad. And really, when they get mad in that moment, it feels like, why are you getting mad at me? I'm asking you what you're doing because I love you. right? So then we're like, well, how dare you get mad at me? I'm the one that's fighting for this. So what I'm going to push you guys to do is, one, you've got to get down to those base emotions as much as possible. I'm lonely, I'm scared. Talk about the attachment wounds. I'm feeling rejected, or I'm afraid of rejection, I'm afraid of abandonment, I'm afraid of neglect, right? Whatever wounds are coming up, and ask the other person, can you show up for me? You could ask, could you talk about what you're doing in recovery? Or even if you're not actively doing recovery, tell me that. Tell me what's going on so that I know. So I really encourage just trying to get into that and share and ask, rather than to tell our partner, here's what you think, here's what you feel, here's what you should be doing, right? Anytime we get into telling our partner, they shut down and they're gone, typically. So ask me more questions in regard to this if I'm not answering it fully, but hopefully that's going to help you guys to start to unwind that cycle that you guys are getting into.
And I was thinking, as someone in recovery, like, first of all, I hear the person that posted this as like, I'm doing these things for recovery for me. Great. And I hear the other person maybe struggling a little bit. I understand why you would be going, oh no, because we all understand the consequences of, of relapse and all of that. So I guess my encouragement to the person who, to the partner is, what would keep you from wanting to continue on the recovery path? Are you a little stuck? Do you need a higher level of support with something? Are there some resources that would help you break through whatever spot you're in? And quite frankly, I get, I hear all the time. I've been around recovery tables a long time, and people just think I'm all better or whatever, or I can start skating a little bit because, got that handled. And people relapse after 20 years or more. So, it's so important to me as a recovering person to continue to do what I need to do to take care of my recovery.
It may sound like a cliche. If there's one thing I teach over and over, and this applies to every human being I work with, whether they struggle with addiction or whatever they struggle with, when you learn a principle of truth that helps you be healthier and happier, you can't go back to living the old way, right? Anytime you take it easy, or, oh, well, I've worked really hard, I deserve a break. I'm sorry, there is no break, right? If you've learned a new way of living, you have to live that way. People will, and this may be a terrible example, and I know very little about nutrition and dieting, but people will tell me I'm on a diet. And I think about it in the same way of recovery. You can't be on a diet in recovery. Like, you are either living a recovery lifestyle based on what you've learned about yourself and the tools and the actions that you're taking that work for you, or you're not, right? Like, and so you can even own it and say, yeah, I've kind of relaxed a little bit lately, and I'm going back to some of my own old ways, and I realize I'm kind of in a yucky limbo state, right? Like, you can own it and say it, and you can say, you know what, I need to get back on and start doing some of these things. Otherwise, I could see myself in a bad place. Great, be honest, right? But there is no such thing as I've recovered and now I'm going to go back to living how I was minus the addiction. It's impossible. It's a matter of time, and you're going to be full blown back into it.
Which, going back to the person that posts, I understand your terror. You're watching somebody choose to do something different that you know it's working for you. You know it worked for him, and now he's choosing not to do it as much. I understand the terror that you're seeing. This person that I care about, and what's going to happen.
Yeah, for sure.
So, next question. At what point in recovery can the partner expect gaslighting, lying, manipulating to slow or stop? Addict is in SAA and therapy.
So my quick response to this one, because I saw this one and I've thought as quickly as I can about it, and my initial response is, I don't know that that stops until the person is in recovery for themselves and begins to gain awareness of themselves, and essentially where they developed the ability to gaslight, where they developed the ability to lie and manipulate, and they start to really understand why those coping mechanisms were developed for their survival in their life. And as they start to understand kind of the history of where they learn to gaslight, lie, and manipulate to survive, you're not going to see those changes happen. So a lot of times early in recovery, people are in recovery because they're afraid to lose their partner, or they're going to lose their job, or they're going to have some consequence, and so they're kind of wrestling through it and begrudging. And you're still going to see, anytime their survival is threatened, the gaslighting, the lying, the manipulation is just going to be instinctual, because that's what they developed as a mechanism to survive up until this point in their life. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work for relationships, for sure. And so when that person starts to gain a greater understanding of that survival, why they developed it, and start to be accountable for it, right? You don't, and that's the hard thing. I think it slowly gets less and less and less. And as they gain the awareness and develop the accountability, and as they learn to reduce their shame. So when you say slow or stop, I think I just answered that question. I mean, stop. Well, man, I think sometimes it's like anything else. It can sneak back up and we go, oh, shoot, I just lied to you. I shouldn't have done that. Right. And what you find is just faster accountability. That's when you can see, man, they're really healing. Their accountability came back faster. They're doing it less, or their accountability happened in the first place. Sometimes it's just a miracle to get that, right? So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, and I think, recovery is a process, and that, I mean, when they stop the behavior, when there's discovery, that isn't recovery. That's abstinence, maybe sober, but recovery is learning the tools and learning to live differently. I mean, that takes, that takes time. We talk, with Dr. Rob, we talk about, it's, if you're seeing your individual therapist and doing group work, and and doing all these right things to help replace all the things that were negative, 12 months minimum, maybe 18 months, whatever. So but you should be seeing, I say the breadcrumbs, and they should be getting a little closer, that you go, okay, I see, that person's building trust with me. And, it used to take them 24 hours because we've got a 24-hour rule, and it used to take them 23 hours and 59 minutes. And now, it's within the first hour that, hey, I lied to you. I was afraid of what your reaction would be. I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want to make you mad or whatever. But as they see, okay, you go, okay, I'm not happy about that, but I appreciate you being honest with me. That starts to create the safety where they go, okay, that wasn't so bad. I'm willing to try that again. So it's a process. So
Absolutely.
So the next question, Tammy, when you said earlier that your husband has few words, so you need girlfriends, how would you take it if your husband had plenty of words and supports, etc., for an affair partner, but with me, he has few words? He tries to say this is how he is, but I know otherwise because of the audio evidence I heard of him. And we've talked before, and I'm so sorry you have the audio evidence, because now this is stuck in your brain. And, I had a call yesterday from somebody, and, they were telling everything, and I'm like, stop. You can't unhear that, and without,
Right.
A therapeutic intervention. But what my husband, he's not an addict. I am. He's just normal. I don't know how, but he has skills and tools, and he can do life without, whatever. So you're talking about an addict who lies and gaslights and does everything else. So that comparison is different. You deserve support, and you need your girlfriends, and you need other betrayed partners, so that you have that support and you can actually talk to them, about that. But what he's lying, because
Yeah.
He's telling you he's one way, but he's showing you, something different.
I'll jump in on this too, if that's okay, Tammy.
Please.
The interesting thing, and I see this a lot, is that you have, let's say you have this evidence, right? And that's super painful. And the thing is that for so long in your relationship, you've been craving connection with this individual. And so then you hear this dialogue going back and forth, and you're like, I've wanted this type of connection. Why can't he give me this type of connection? Usually that's the pain and hurt that's coming up there. The problem that is happening is you're looking at him have this affair partner, and that is not a fully vulnerable or even a vulnerable relationship, in the sense that they're engaging in a fantasy together. They're lying about what's going on, even if the affair partner, let's say they're a reasonably healthy person who's just been, tricked. But essentially, he is living a fantasy, and he's engaging in his fantasy how he knows to engage. He knows he's a master, because somebody who struggles with an addiction is a master at getting their needs met. And so he's a master at knowing how to engage the fantasy so that it meets the high that he's looking for. And so what you're seeing is fake vulnerability typically. And so I'm gonna tell you, he was able to connect with you in that way. And I guarantee you, let's say that your relationship ended and he went with that affair partner, that vulnerability would fall as quickly as there is the real problems of life to deal with, right? Oh, we've got to talk about finances. I'm shutting down. We've got to talk about, taking care of family members. I'm gone, right? As soon as you get into the real part of life, that vulnerability is gone, right? I could go and flirt and engage and have a surface level fun relationship with any human being, but have to deal with the real life problems and the planning of life. It doesn't happen. So be careful, because you're essentially watching or listening, in this case, the fantasy play out, and it's the fantasy of vulnerability, but not real vulnerability with all the intricacies that a healthy relationship takes to actually engage. And then you're judging your relationship off of that. It would be like trying to judge if you were a spy, as dumb as this analogy sounds, and you watch, the James Bond films, and you're like, wow, my job isn't this cool. You're going to be disappointed, because James Bond is a fantasy. A real spy has a lot of boring stuff to deal with. So those are some quick thoughts that I think might help with that.
I was thinking too, I mean, I get emails, and it's usually emails from people who, we were affair partners and now we're married and it's a hot mess. And I'm thinking, of course, because what you thought you were going to get was that fantasy of no trash to take out, no bills to pay, and all of that. And now you got the real life that you had with the other people that you had before. So, that fantasy doesn't translate. Real life invades it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to skip to the bottom one. Can an SA ever recover if they do not work on their childhood trauma, and what does this work look like?
Yeah, I actually love that you skipped to that one, because I actually read that one real fast and I was like, oh, I want to talk about this one. So interestingly enough, right, I think it's tough because we get into this space where, let's say we figure out what works really well for us in recovery, or let's say we figure out what works for the general population. I'm going to suggest that yes, somebody who struggles with sex addiction can recover if they don't work on their childhood trauma. I think there are certain segments of the population where working on their childhood trauma may not actually be helpful. There's a lot to be said for some of the Buddhist teachings that is essentially, you know what, I need to learn to work with what I have in the present and learn to regulate what's going on in the present. I think that for most people, working on the childhood trauma is pretty necessary, that we're not able to get past that we have neural wiring that's been done. I think for most people, it's really important to work on their childhood trauma. But let's say, for instance, you have somebody that for whatever reason, working on their childhood trauma isn't going to help them. What they can do is to learn the tools, learn the principles, learn accountability, learn how to be honest, right? Learn routine that they need to develop in order to maintain sobriety and to live in healthy recovery. I go back to one of the things I learned in becoming a sex addiction therapist. There's a bunch of rules, but the only rule that really ever stood out to me by Patrick Carnes was rule number 7. And he says an addict will fail to maintain sobriety when there is insufficient structure. So we know that structure is really important in maintaining a healthy recovery. When there's maintained secrets, so we can't keep any secrets. And I change it a little bit. I say when there's maintained shame. So we can't keep secrets. We can't maintain shame. And then lastly, when there's an insufficient first step. So we need to be humble and recognize that without our higher power and without a wonderful support group around us, we're not going to maintain recovery. Nowhere in those rules does it say, and again, it's rules that I think Patrick Carnes came up with because he was a pretty intelligent clinician treating sex addiction. Does he say you have to go back to your childhood? As a treating clinician, I found that for most everybody I work with, it's really important. But I don't know that there's this hard, fast rule that says you have to. Now, if somebody says they don't need to, I will often question. I want to find out, is that avoidance? Is that them trying to avoid? Because if we avoid, ultimately, we might be maintaining shame that we're not getting to. So I think working with a clinician who understands the population, understands the addiction is really important. But I do believe that for whatever reason, if somebody is able to get into recovery and maintain a solid structure, maintain authenticity and integrity, and recognize their dependence on other people, that they can have a solid recovery. So hopefully that answers the question.
I think that's really helpful. And my caveat to that is, and they're not using something else like me, because I hear, well, they're not looking at porn anymore, but they just sit on the couch and smoke cannabis all day long. Well, so you haven't really stopped all the addictive behavior.
Yeah, you can't trade one addiction for another. No, absolutely. Do you know what's so funny? That seems so obvious to me. It didn't even cross my mind. So I love that you brought that up, because yes, you're not in recovery if you trade one addiction for another. It's just that we wouldn't even call that recovery. So
well,
Tammy,
a lot of people do, because they go, well, I'm not doing that anymore, but I'm doing, this, and this. And
I'm so glad you brought that up. Absolutely. You can't jump from one to another and call it recovery. It's not possible.
Well, and I think one of the challenges is that those, first of all, the jumping right into the trauma stuff is, triggers relapse. So you need to have tools, you need to have stability, you need to have structure, and then you can start, picking away at that stuff. But what I find happens too often is, those wounds, keep popping up, and they're so darn uncomfortable that if you aren't attending to them, it is prime for relapse. So to me, well, and I want to be happy, joyous, and free, and I want to be serene, and I don't want to have that constant, hole in my soul, as I call it, that I feel like, oh, it's just so uncomfortable. Yeah, I don't live I live in recovery now. I don't live in my addiction, and I don't have to deal with those things, because I continue to try to do the work. So
absolutely. I love it.
We are out of time. We know we missed a few questions, and I'm sorry about that, but come back, and Dr. Rob will be on Monday night, and there's lots more opportunities. If you haven't plugged into some of the drop-in groups, I really highly invite you to do that as well. They're very secure spaces. We try to make sure that, well, each of them is moderated so that they can be a safe space for those of you that are joining. So, but Matt, great to see you. Thanks so much.
I love doing this, so I'll see you next time. When I
Thank
think
you.
we're skipping the next week because it's the 5th week.
It's the 5th week. Yes, I'm traveling. So I was like, it actually works out. It's the 5th week.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And
so
then,
it's all good.
Kim's the week after that, and then I'm the week after that.
Yeah.
So please come back and ask lots of questions. I love the questions you guys are asking. Good work.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.